As neither Dean Greeno nor Dr. Lee can be here today, I will begin these proceedings. This court has been called into session to hear testimony from defendants who, for the most part, are undergraduates at Harvard College and therefore subject to the rules relating to college studies. Under these, any disciplinary action against good order will be taken care of by the faculty or the administrative board. Due to the unpleasant nature of these offenses, President Lowell has asked us to bypass the ordinary channels of communication and submit reports directly to him. The verbal testimony the court is about to hear regarding these indiscretions of certain undergraduates will be dealt with in the following manner. If charged but proven innocent, the student will not be disciplined. If he is charged and proven guilty, discipline will be enforced through either probation, suspension from all classes, dismissal from the university with the possibility of return, or expulsion, by which separation from the university and Cambridge will be final. Understanding these punitive actions, we shall proceed to summon those men whose names are mentioned in the evidences provided by the brother of the deceased, the proctor in Perkins Hall, and an anonymous undergraduate. As we do so, the court will determine the level of the charge, knowing that the students called before us today are our future peers in learning and knowledge. Under the banner of this great institution, they shall be held accountable for their crimes, which their present course of education should have prevented. Every student is responsible for maintaining his good standing. A failure to observe the college rules is a failure to observe the truth.
We call Nathaniel Wolff to the stand. Mr. Wolff, please introduce yourself.
My name is Nathaniel Wolff. I was born in Rochester, New York, and prepared at Exeter Academy. I am a junior here at Harvard, and I live in Stoughton Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Wolff. Your Harvard career was interrupted in 1917. You enlisted in the war, is that correct?
Yes, sir. In my sophomore year, I was assigned to Base Hospital No. 1 and sent overseas to France. I was promoted to private first class before being discharged on May 7th last year.
We're proud you served your country.
Thank you, sir, but I was happy to return to Harvard.
Of course. Mr. Wolff, did you know this student?
That's Cyril Wilcox.
Before examinations in April, Mr. Wilcox withdrew from the college due to ill health. He had a nervous attack in front of Dr. Lee and was sent down to straighten himself out. Are you aware that Mr. Wilcox is now dead?
Yes, sir, everyone knows that.
Are you familiar with how he died?
I told you the other day, sir. All the boys are saying it was suicide.
Why would Mr. Wilcox commit suicide, do you suppose?
Poor health?
Mr. Wolff, the court is about to hear testimony.
Excuse me, Dean Gate, did you say the court?
The court is about to hear testimony from those individuals whose names are mentioned in certain documentary evidence. You have been brought in because you approached a member of this court, myself, and said that you had something of interest to share.
Yes, sir. During the war, I saw many terrible things. Soldiers with their arms blown off and faces burnt. When I came back, I decided I would pursue a career in medicine, help the fellows coming home. For 2 months, I was assigned to a dental lab where I met a Harvard boy named Eugene Cummings. I didn't see him again until this year. Then, quite recently, Cyril Wilcox pulled me aside one day and told me how Cummings had approached him late one afternoon and spoke of a need for wider education on campus.
What sort of education?
Sex education. Cyril didn't get it at first until Cummings made up a lie and said he knew of a chap who lived in Perkins Hall who had gone under the influence of a Boston man. He continued his game and said he thought that the man's name was Harry Dreyfus. That's when Cyril broke down and told him the truth. You see, Cyril had been having relations.
Yes, Mr. Wolff?
Cyril had been having relations with a Boston man, this man Dreyfus.
That's what you heard from Wilcox.
Yes. It bothered him that Cummings had found out and tricked him into telling him, but he wasn't about to lie, being in love and all.
When Mr. Wilcox told you there were others with whom he had relations, did this surprise you?
He didn't have to tell me. I already knew there was a group on campus.
A group? What kind of group? A secret group?
I knew about it.
Hearing Wilcox's story, did you think that Eugene Cummings was part of that group?
No. I mean, I have no idea who's in the group.
Mr. Wolff, you seem rather comfortable in the knowledge that there's a group of men like Mr. Wilcox operating here at Harvard College.
When I turned 12, I went to a boarding school that was permeated with this sort of thing.
What sort of thing?
Masturbation among the boys.
Did you participate?
I was attacked twice and told to keep still before crying out. I did my best to suppress myself, and I thought I had overcome the habit. That's all it is, a habit. Until late one day last winter, I met a Harvard chap at a local spot. He had just joined the dramatic club and was happy to talk things over. We had supper, and by the frequent allusions he made to the theater, I knew he was one of them.
Who is this man?
Smarridge, sir. Keith Smarridge.
What happened between you and Smarridge?
After dinner, we went back to his room. I stayed a few hours. Then we took off our tuxedos and masturbated.
Was this your first offense in college? After this encounter, did you return to Smarridge's room?
Only once. I stopped by to say hi, but he said he wasn't feeling very comfortable, so I left and went back to my room.
Did you return to your room alone?
I took Smarridge with me.
And did a similar act occur? Mr. Wolff, what is your opinion on homosexualism?
I don't know, sir.
What do you think of Mr. Smarridge?
I think Smarridge is a homosexual prostitute.
Homosexualism and prostitution.
Sir, I never said anything to anyone who didn't already know. I never started this corruption. It was already here. But I've overcome the habit. I'm 90% okay.
Mr. Wolff, when we spoke yesterday, you said there were 3 men about whom you'd had suspicions. Come to find out, Smarridge was one of them. Whom else?
The other chap, he's not as bad as Smarridge. His name's Gilkey, Stanley Gilkey. I've since met one or two fellows with whom Gilkey has been close. And the other boy is Roberts, Ernest Roberts, the son of a congressman.
Mr. Wolff, in your candor before the court, you've confessed to the practice of homosexualism with another college student. Such an offense is immoral and condemned by this university. Since you admitted your guilt, you will be advised by the acting dean of Harvard College to withdraw from the university.
What?
Every student is responsible for observing the college rules, Mr. Wolff, or he shall be removed from his studies. This is a dismissal. You can reapply in the fall, and you may be allowed to return in 1 year. For now, please leave Cambridge immediately. What have we gotten ourselves into? Who's next?
A tutor by the name of Harold Saxton.
Mr. Saxton, please take a seat and state your full name for the court.
My name is Harold Winfield Saxton.
Thank you, Mr. Saxton. I'm Regent Matthew Luce, and with me is Assistant Deans Gay and Murdoch, who have come to interview you regarding some unpleasant business which has come to our attention. You graduated from Harvard College last year and received your diploma, and presently you live with your parents on Hancock Street. Is that right?
That is right.
You are employed as an undergraduate tutor at the college.
That is right.
In your capacity as undergraduate tutor, did you make the acquaintance of Cyril Wilcox?
Yes, I knew him. He lives in Perkins Hall.
He did. Tragically, he died 2 weeks ago. He was asphyxiated, turned the heat up on his gas lamp, and inhaled the fumes all night long. Not an uncommon method of suicide these days.
I can only imagine how it must be for his parents.
Especially his brother. Lester Wilcox was extremely upset at his brother's passing. In fact, he visited Dean Greenough last week. Can you imagine why?
Cyril was a little melancholic, but not a violent boy. I'm sure his brother can't understand what made him do it.
Actually, he can. On the day that Mr. Wilcox ended his short life, 2 letters arrived for him in the mail. Mr. Wilcox opened one and found that it was addressed to Salome's child. Who is Salome's child, Mr. Saxton?
I'm not sure that I know.
Document 4 is dated May 14th, 1920. It reads, "And I quote, I had hoped that time would provide me with much cheering dirt, but alas, not a speck have I for the dishpan. And so I resort to red ink to dazzle you. Oh, there are tricks and tricks." Tricks, Mr. Saxton? Of what tricks does the writer refer? This is your letter, is it not? The return address is marked 161 Hancock Street, and it's marked Harold W. Saxton. Of what tricks do you refer, Mr. Saxton?
None.
Mr. Saxton, you are a tutor at this college. We should like to know about your relationship with the late Mr. Wilcox. Were you his academic tutor?
At first, until we became friends.
Friends? What sort of friends?
I was concerned about Cyril, which is why I wrote the letter. He was not doing right. His grades were poor and he was sick with the hives. When he was sent down, I tried to encourage him, get him to quit drinking and start studying, but he wouldn't listen.
Mr. Saxton, alcohol has been prohibited across this country, including on this campus, since January of this year. What was Mr. Wilcox drinking? Was something troubling him? Who is this man?
That's Harry Dreyfus.
He is not a Harvard man.
He lives in Boston.
Have you been to visit him?
Why would I visit Dreyfus?
Maybe you were his friend.
I was friends with Cyril.
Mr. Saxton, there is a group of men in Boston who are notorious degenerates. To name a few, Ned Courtney, Harold Husey, and this man Dreyfus. Do you know any of these men?
Yes, I know them.
How did you become acquainted with them?
I met Dreyfus at his cafe, the Cafe Dreyfus. The others I've seen at the Rooster.
The Rooster?
The Golden Rooster, it's a Cambridge restaurant.
Yes, you mentioned this in your letter. Since the raids on the Golden Rooster, what kind of raids occur at the Golden Rooster, Mr. Saxton?
Police raids.
Is alcohol served?
I'm not sure I know.
I'm not sure I know. Mr. Saxton, let's make a clean breast of it. This letter exposes a relationship that is unhealthy for a tutor to have with his student. Salome's child, raids on the Rooster. You continue, I never see any of that crowd now that you have deserted us for fairer fields. Are you ever coming back to the fold? What crowd? What fold, Mr. Saxton?
Cyril was very young inside. He needed protection.
Were you part of this protecting fold? Was Ernest Roberts? You add, if you know how Roberts' campaign in Brookline is developed, do enlighten a poor recluse. What campaign?
That's just jargon.
Roberts' father was a Massachusetts representative in Congress. Maybe his son is campaigning to get elected?
Roberts is campaigning to get married.
Oh, Roberts is dating a woman now. This is good news. Mr. Saxton, have you ever participated in any unnatural acts with a man?
I'm not sure I know.
You would certainly know if you were naked with another man. Have you ever been naked with another man?
There was one occasion. No, I'm not sure that I have.
Just a moment ago, I heard you say that there was one occasion. Would you please tell us with whom and when you committed this offense? Was it with Courtney or Dreyfus? Do not tell this court it was with an undergraduate whom you tutored. Mr. Saxton, your testimony reveals that there is a group of unmanly fellows at this college, and your letter suggests that Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Roberts were a part of this effeminate underground. trips into Boston, raids at these cafes, familiarity with town degenerates, some of whom attended parties in Perkins Hall. And might I add that your name is mentioned in a letter from an anonymous undergraduate who writes,
One member is named Saxton, who finished last year but is about college tutoring.
the evidence is against you in this matter, Mr. Saxton. How do you plead to these charges?
It wasn't until last month that I knew anything was wrong with Cyril. That's why I wrote the letter. Something was wrong. I wanted to cheer him up. I admit there was one act of indecency, but just one. Only one.
Your evidence against you has shown that you have committed a homosexual act with an undergraduate whom you tutored. As you have already graduated from Harvard College, no further disciplinary actions can be taken against you. But know without a doubt that your superiors have found you guilty of the sin of homosexualism with at least one of these men. No doubt Mr. Wilcox, of whom you were so fond.
No, not Cyril. Never Cyril.
In a few days, you will be asked by Dean Greeno to resign from your responsibilities at Harvard College. You will no longer be permitted to tutor any student with whom you might take professional advantage, nor will you be recommended for any positions of authority. Henceforth, you are banished from all associations with Harvard College.
The next student to be called is Kenneth Day.
Mr. Day, have a seat and introduce yourself.
My name's Kenneth Day. I'm in my second year concentrating in government. I live in Perkins Hall and I'm a member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon. I served in the Students' Army Training Corps in 1918 and I run track and sometimes box.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Before entering Harvard College, where did you prepare?
Boston English High School.
A local boy. How did your parents welcome your acceptance into Harvard?
Both my parents are dead. My father died when I was 10. My mother died just before him.
I'm terribly sorry. Who then receives your reports?
My grandma.
And does she pay your tuition?
I depend on relatives for financial assistance.
I see. Mr. Day, before the current academic year, with whom did you room?
With him, Sir Wilcox.
As his roommate, you must have known him rather well.
Pretty well.
Were you surprised at all to hear of his death?
I knew the kind of life Cyril was leading.
What kind of life is that?
Life with lots of fellows.
How do you mean?
Fellows like Cyril. Funny, loosey fellows.
What did Mr. Wilcox say about these fellows?
Nothing. We weren't on speaking terms for a while. I was disgusted with him. I couldn't bring myself to talk to him.
Did he ever say or do anything to hurt you?
No. Is this confidential?
Anything you say will be kept private.
There was this wreck who used to come around. He'd sleep in our room 2 or 3 nights at a time, and Wilcox would go over and sleep with him. That was enough for me, sleeping with your fellows. Maybe he's so damn mad I could kill him. I said, one day I'll give Cyril what he deserves.
And you never spoke to Wilcox again?
I did. One Sunday I found a note on my desk apologizing for acting funny. Maybe he wasn't as bad as I thought. I couldn't help but shake hands with him when we went to church together. He seemed happy to be friendly and nearly broke down. I guess he wasn't that bad. Only perhaps he couldn't help being a little queer.
After that incident, did you two spend time together?
Well, I never got too pally with him, but it was better to at least be on speaking terms. I promised myself I'd room alone next year and know who I'm getting.
Do you know a man named Harry Dreyfus?
Yeah. He goes about town to the lighted lamp and the golden rooster.
When was the last time you saw him?
With Cyril this spring. I said hello, that's all.
Have you been to his apartment in Boston?
Yes.
Did you spend the night there?
No. What is this?
This court is investigating what might have led to the untimely death of Mr. Wilcox. Your name is mentioned in several documents. For instance, the proctor of Perkins Hall has seen you in the company of Ernest Roberts. He lives in Perkins Hall 2, you'll recall, room 28. Would you care to tell us about your relationship with Roberts?
I have no relationship with Roberts. I've visited him. I've also visited Cyril 6 or 7 times this year.
How many times have you seen Roberts?
Once, twice, every day. What does it matter?
A letter sent to the court by an anonymous undergraduate. You are described as being
Chums of Roberts.
Could you tell us about the parties in Perkins Hall, room 28?
It was in the middle of winter. There were small affairs in Robert's room.
Who attended these parties?
Roberts,
Any Boston men?
a few.
Any sailors?
No,
At these parties were sailors in uniform, whom Roberts and friends of his type picked up in the streets of Boston and used for his dirty, immoral purposes.
Any sailors, Mr. Day?
a few.
What else?
I saw a man dressed in women's clothes. And once I saw a woman dressed in man's clothes.
At these parties, were you ever alone with Mr. Roberts?
Sometimes.
Were you aware that Mr. Roberts indulged in the same practices as your former roommate?
Yeah, I knew.
Mr. Day, are you a member of Roberts' immoral gang?
I've never had improper relations with a man.
Have you had relations with a woman?
Yeah, I went with a woman 2 years ago.
Do you masturbate?
What? No! I haven't masturbated in 7 years. I object to these questions.
We should like you to read from a letter written just days before Mr. Wilcox died. It is dated May 10th, and it was written by Ernest Roberts. I should like to add that the court is highly offended by the contents of this letter. Start at the top, first paragraph, where you see your name.
Dear Cyril, Kenneth is being sucked foolish by anyone and everybody he can lay hold of. I almost regret bringing him out. However, he still maintains his same old self. I do it for him once in a while for diversion. That's a lie out of whole cloth!
Do you admit to engaging in immoral acts with Roberts and his pals?
No! I've had no improper relations with everybody who came along. Roberts is a braggart. He thinks he's being funny, but he's not.
And why did you go back to visit these men, Dreyfus, Roberts, Cummings, when you knew what type they were?
Wilcox was my roommate last year. He introduced me to these fellows when they came along. I had no knowledge of his character that'd be put in danger. The college put us together. It was my freshman year. I had no choice.
Precisely. Roberts's letter was written this year, in your sophomore year.
I was drunk. They approached me and I was drunk. Before now, it's never been so.
When was your first offense?
At the beginning of this year, he took me to the lighted lamp.
Who?
Roberts. When he and I were alone. I've been with Roberts only. I admit I'm probably a little tainted. My mind could be poisoned from these fellows, but I've cut it out since a month ago. I'm clean out!
When was the last time you saw Roberts?
Yesterday at the Union. But I offered him no smell, not even the remote illusion we were friends. I don't drink anymore either.
Mr. Day, please identify the following men as guilty or innocent of homosexuality. Harold Saxton,
Guilty.
Eugene Cummings,
Guilty.
Joseph Lombard, the Boston men, Ned Courtney,
Guilty.
Harold Husey,
Guilty.
and Edward Say.
Guilty!
Anyone else in your gang we've missed?
I'm sure I have no names to add.
Good. Mr. Day, you run track, no doubt. You're proud of your record. In this area, you have fallen into difficulty so serious it will be impossible for you to run away. You have confessed to practicing homosexual behavior with your college fellow. Because of this disgrace, you will be asked by the acting dean to withdraw from the college.
Withdraw? I was only Cyril's roommate.
If during your freshman and sophomore years you were induced to commit unnatural acts with the boys you met, you were free to display the strength of character that a Harvard man stands for. That is, to resist the temptation before the habit became uncontrollable, but you did not. No blame can rest upon this university for rooming you with your moral inferior, when at any time you might have gone to the dean and asked for a transfer. This is a distressing situation you find yourself in, but we will discuss it no further.
This is unjust. I've done nothing wrong. I'm the least involved.
Good day, Mr. Day.
You wish to see me?
Please introduce yourself to the court, Mr. Say.
My name is Edward A. Say. I'm in my first year at Harvard. I read The Advocate and write poetry and admire moving pictures. Why, when the Pathé Company was on Soldiers Field in April, I watched them take photographs of the track squad, running hurdles and pole vaulting. I had a swell time. Oh, and I carry a secret torch for the film star Harold Lloyd. He's a peach, but my ambition is to meet Rudolph Valentino, who is breathless beauty.
Mr. Say, what kind of man do you consider yourself?
A Harvard man.
Are Harvard men as conspicuous as yourself?
Well, I may admit I may differ from my brothers just a pinch. And on occasion I have been the hopeless recluse. But life is just too beautiful, don't you think? Like the fairy tale says, be bold, but not too bold.
Mr. Say, if I may have your attention on a serious matter. You live in Perkins Hall, is that correct?
Room 24. Joe and I live together. I love Perkins Hall. I love Joe.
We'll get to Joe in a minute. Last year, a student lived in Perkins Hall by the name of Cyril Wilcox.
Dear Cyril. Moody. Cyril, I just knew him passingly. I didn't know it was a suicide until the other day. It seems strange in a way.
Why strange?
I heard things. That he was having troubles in class and had gotten ill and was having trouble with the whole thing. And he started hanging around a man named Harold Dreyfus. I don't know him, but I heard that they had relations which were supposed to be disreputable.
Male homosexuality, Mr. Say. Wilcox and Dreyfus were lovers, degenerates, perverts. To have physical relations with another man is unhygienic and criminal. What can you tell us about such practices?
Nothing. Only what I've been told.
Have you been intimate with a man? Have you been intimate with a woman? Have you ever masturbated?
Once.
Once in your whole life?
Once a week. The fellows stir up the pudding. Is that criminal too?
It is a vile habit, Mr. Say.
Oh, then I'll stop right away.
It encourages homosexuality. Mr. Say, do you know Ernest Weeks Roberts?
Yes, I know Ernest. He's the wealthy sheik of Perkins Hall. Our very own Valentino.
Have you attended parties in his room?
Well, I went to one shortly after Thanksgiving.
Would you say there was an air of homosexualism in Roberts' room?
The conversation was typical of any college room. But I remember he had peacock feathers in a vase. I should have told him it's bad luck to keep peacock feathers in your room, but I thought it was exotic.
Mr. Say, in a letter Roberts wrote to Mr. Wilcox, he mentioned that these terrible faggot parties bore, not to say disgust me. Can you explain what he meant by faggot parties?
Means nothing to me. I can only guess what one is. I didn't stay long enough to find out. I didn't know anyone there, and I was uncomfortable too, so I left.
Was your roommate there?
Joe? Sure. He came along, but we left together. You can ask him if we left together. He'll say we left together. Ask him about Dartmouth, too. We went to Dartmouth together, but we didn't feel uncomfortable there.
Mr. Say, were any of the following men at the party? Harold Saxton, Eugene Cummings, Ned Courtney.
Saxton was in the room at the time, and Courtney was there too.
So you do know the men at the party. Just a moment ago, you said you did not. We want the truth, Mr. Say. Has Roberts ever approached you?
In what sense?
In a homosexual sense.
We played bridge together, and we went to dinner together once too. Roberts asked me to come back to his room, but I refused. Courtney came around too and asked Joe and I to come into Roberts' room for a party, but I told him to scram so we could study. I don't like Courtney. He calls frequently. I have to go out into the hall and answer the telephone. Is Roberts there? Well, give him a message that I called. Harold Hussey, too. Where's Roberts? Oh, I don't know. What have you been up to? Been staying in the room studying. Their whole crowd thinks I'm a pushover. But I know what they're up to. I'm not dumb.
Are you queer?
I'm not a bimbo like Joe. I'm a good boy. A Christian boy like my parents. My father tells me don't take any wooden nickels in life, so I don't. I had a drink once, but it made me giggle, so I quit. I study every day and try not to get stuck on anyone. When I was younger, I had a physical condition that made me wear a plaster cast until I was 8. It kept me out of athletics. I know I'm probably a little soft to some degree. But I've grown up, and I will argue the assertion that Look, I've got nothing to get out of lying. If I was acquainted with Roberts, it was by proximity only, which made it necessary for me to know what was going on and what was being said, and am I being framed?
Mr. Say, pull yourself together.
But I'm not queer.
Edward Say, I suspect you are lying to this court. From your room in Perkins Hall, you were only a few doors down from that occupied by Roberts. I suspect that you knew all of the persons at those parties, that you attended more than one, and that you stayed longer than you admit. You've confessed to a familiarity with these men, one of whom has asserted that you committed homosexual acts. Now, you may deny this or claim a weakened constitution, but your connection with these men has corrupted you. Suffering as you did in your youth does not excuse you from a moral life as an adult, or having the wisdom to distinguish between right and wrong company. I regret to say this, but we must remove you from our presence and send you down.
I'm being expelled?
You will receive a letter from the acting dean advising you to withdraw from the college. I suggest you explain it all to your parents first and tell them the truth. I want to see his roommate.
Joseph Lombard.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Joe Lombard Jr., class of 1922. In my freshman year, I was student council rep and president of the freshman debating team.
Where do you live?
Perkins Hall, room 24.
And with whom do you room?
Eddie Say.
Did you know the late Cyril Wilcox?
I met him 2 or 3 times in our hall, going to parties in 28.
When you met him, how did he behave?
He seemed distracted,
If you could, describe the parties in Perkins 28.
wild.
Did you think these parties too wild for the college?
We have a broad-minded proctor who wouldn't object.
Do you know the boy who rooms there? Ernest Roberts.
I know him and his crowd, mostly through Eddie.
If you could, describe Roberts' crowd.
College boys, and 2 or 3 men from Boston.
You mean,
Faggots. A negative bunch with no morals. Used to talk their jargon around me.
such as...
One of them would come in our room and ask, "John, are you going out tonight? Roberts is hosting a bitch party." Like that.
Did that offend you?
It's just talk.
Is Ernest Roberts a...
Faggot? Most certainly.
How about your roommate?
I heard rumors from Roberts that Eddie had relations with two boys, Courtney and Cummings. I don't know if it's true.
Did you ever confront Say about it?
Well, he admitted the influence of these people over him. Eddie wears rouge, more or less. He explains it by saying he had trouble with his spine as a boy and was cared for too closely by his mother, so he walks a little effeminate. He's changed since the beginning of the year. He's secretive with me and not inclined to be frank.
Tell us about the phone in Perkins 28. Do you use it much?
Only to call the folks. Eddie uses it more. He answers it whenever it rings. If Eddie's not around, I'll take messages. Other boys do too.
What kind of messages have you taken?
Is a fella in? Tell him I called. That sort of thing. The caller usually says who it is. I've taken calls from Courtney and Cummings, asking if men were about the dorm.
Have you taken calls from any Boston men?
Outsiders don't get messages. There might be one, but that's rare. Maybe if there's a party that night.
Who else attended these parties?
Well, a couple faggots from the Golden Rooster, and there were men, dolled up in women's clothing, dancing and drinking.
Did you drink?
I don't drink.
Did you dance?
Once,
Did you observe any unnatural behavior?
I saw two boys kissing.
How did you feel about that?
I didn't stay to watch.
What time did you leave?
Around 1:30.
And did the party continue long after?
Everyone left 10 or 15 minutes later.
So you left when the party was nearly over. Why did you stay so long, Mr. Lombard?
I guess I was interested. It was my first time in Robert's room. I didn't realize they were all faggots until I thought about it later.
Do you know what a homosexual is?
He's a male bitch, a faggot.
Are you a homosexual?
I should say not!
Do you masturbate?
I did 6 years ago, but I stopped that.
Have you ever been in bed with a woman?
I've never had relations with a woman.
Have you been in bed with a man?
You already asked me that.
Have you?
A couple times after a party, 4 or 5 boys needed a place to stay, so I let them sleep in my room.
Can you give us names? Cummings, for example.
Not so often. It was usually a fellow named Pat. He slept in my room 7 or 8 times. And once I slept with Bill Toomey.
In your room?
In my room.
In your bed?
In my bed.
And in the course of the night, what did you do with these gentlemen? Did you masturbate with them?
We went to sleep. What is this about?
Mr. Lombard, you are a second-year man. I can see by looking at you that you are not a spineless creature. While you indicate your disgust at these men, it would seem that you willingly took their phone calls.
I was simply a transmitter of messages.
You left a party after witnessing 2 men kiss, and you then welcomed these men into your room, even into your bed.
No funny business occurred while I was present.
But Mr. Lombard, we fail to see how, after taking an interest in these men, you yourself could not be coaxed into temptation laying side by side with an obvious homosexual.
I waited for Eddie to tell me, but he kept me in the dark. I didn't know what was really going on. Listen, I would not have stayed that long or answered the phone if I had known they were all whores.
They were, Mr. Lombard. Roberts, Cummings, Mr. Say. Your hallway in Perkins is quite the homosexual brothel, isn't it?
I've never screwed around with boys. Why does coming to Harvard make every man queer?
Enough! This is not a debate. We do not have time to investigate every man on campus or follow him into these cafes and hotel lobbies where this sort of thing lurks. While the sodomy laws keep some of them off the streets, all we can do is govern the Harvard dorm. I shall read from the rules relating to college studies pertaining to boarding. No student shall room in any establishment not approved by the regent, and no individuals shall lodge in a college room who are not members of the college. Mr. Lombard, you knowingly broke the rules by allowing town men to board in your room.
It was only for a few nights. They had no motor car. What was I to do?
While you do not admit to engaging in homosexual practices, you display no objection to these perverts taking their messages, attending their parties, and even allowing such criminals to conjugate in your room. this court finds you guilty of too great an intimacy with this crowd. In a few days, you will be informed by the acting dean to withdraw from Harvard.
Withdraw from Harvard? But they weren't women!
That is the problem, Mr. Lombard. Who is that man Wolff accused of being a homosexual prostitute?
Keith Smarriage.
My name is Keith P. Smarriage. I'm a junior. Next year I'll be a senior in Thayer Hall. I was recently elected to the dramatic club and I took a small part in The Governor's Wife. We played to full houses in Cambridge, Wellesley, and Boston.
Sounds like you're having a good term.
Oh, I've had a great term, sir. It sounds silly, but just knowing I've played a small part and left my name behind in a college show, I can't wait for next semester and another dramatic production. Perhaps I'm a little drunk on the road to success.
Mr. Smarriage, allow me to be frank.
Yes, sir.
Over the past couple of days, this court has heard testimony from a group of men who have rejected the normal stamp of masculinity and embraced a deviant strain of bachelorhood. What used to be unspeakable we now refer to in distaste. Homosexuals, Mr. Smarriage. Do you know any homosexuals among your peers?
I only know of one case, that of Cyril Wilcox. I met him last year when I was visiting a chap in Standish Hall who lives right above him.
Have you heard of Wilcox's fate?
Yes, I heard it at the Green Shutters, over dinner with a fellow from the business school. Hazel Webster is the one who told me.
I understand Miss Webster is a town prostitute.
I don't know her that well, sir.
Have you had sexual relations with her?
No, sir, I haven't.
What else have you heard of the Green Shutters?
I don't go there that often, maybe 4 times at most.
Have you seen Harold Dreyfus there?
No. I only saw Harry at his cafe. I saw him about a job.
Performing what duties?
Playing piano, sir. Last Thanksgiving, I was a part of the entertainment at Phillips Brooks for their annual open house. There was music and singing and reading and magic tricks for the fellows who couldn't make it home. I played piano, and that got me thinking about work. I was in a bit of a hole at the time, only $4 a week allowance, and I liked Cafe Dreyfus. Of course, I didn't know anything about Harry's character when I applied.
Mr. Smarriage, while in Cambridge, were you ever approached by any men who made it obvious that they were homosexuals?
Once, at the Golden Rooster, I was bothered by a group of men having dinner. They were exuberant in their admiration of the Harvard man. Another time I was hanging about the stage door when I was approached by a man on the street. His name was Rogers.
Besides Cafe Dreyfus and the Golden Rooster, have you ever been to the Lighted Lamp?
I only went out of curiosity, but I didn't like the place or the people.
Would you describe those people as faggots?
I don't know what that means, sir.
How about queers?
Yes. I mean, that seems like jargon for their type. The Oscar Wilde type.
Queers are sexual inverts, Mr. Smarriage, commonly found in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and even Boston. They amuse themselves frequenting bohemian establishments like the ones you've mentioned, accosting young men. These oddities have found champions in social writers like Havelock Ellis. Have you heard of Havelock Ellis?
Yes, sir.
Who told you?
One drifts about and hears these things.
Well, you were drifting about Harvard. Did you ever make the acquaintance of Ernest Roberts?
Yes. Yes, sir. I knew Roberts quite well. We were enlisted in the same company, and I used Roberts' room in Gore Hall as barracks during the day.
Did he ever speak to you in a queer tongue?
Roberts never said anything in his room.
Mr. Marriage, earlier you mentioned having had a conversation with Hazel Webster, a known prostitute. One of your fellows, Nathaniel Wolff, has accused you of being a male prostitute. How do you respond to this charge?
No, sir, I'm
Have
not...
you been queer with a man?
No.
Have you been queer with a boy?
No! I have sexual relations with women, though not since summer.
And do you prefer sexual relations with women?
Not always. There was this one time on the train to Buffalo. He told me I was beautiful and he put his hands on me. And I confess there was a wrong thought on my part. And to think evil is as bad as to do evil. But I've resisted their attempts and had narrow escapes. Like the time at the Yale game. I was approached by a man named Herbert Goddard. He lives in Boston and he goes about ruining chaps. He came to my room, but I told him no. And to get back at him, I saved the chap he was with. At least I saved one for a time.
And Roberts, did you narrowly escape sleeping with him as well?
Yes, but Roberts is hardly chaste. He said he's been with Stanley Gilkey. Gilkey got rather gay with me, too. Approached me at the Waldorf, started rubbing my knee. But I said no. And then there was Nathaniel Wolff. Before last year's fall production, he got me in my room. He said I'd make a fine actor and he wanted to see me on stage. Everything he said were things I'd been saying to myself.
You admit you were an accomplice to an act.
Perhaps.
Mr. Smarriage, Nathaniel Wolff has been expelled.
Then I think you're doing right by clearing house. If it helps, I know 50 men like him. A poor fool such as Cyril shouldn't get kicked out and suffer the same fate. There's a lesson in it. Perhaps.
There is. You've provided us with names which has left us with an unpleasant taste in our mouths. You have confessed to homosexual practices with your college fellows, which places you among the inner circle of this homosexual ring. Understand, it is out of a need to protect the incoming class from your theatrical habits that you will be receiving a letter from the acting dean advising you to withdraw from Harvard College. I suggest you speak with your parents about it first and explain everything to them.
But they think the world of me.
Don't lie to your governor as you first lied to us, Marriage. Make a clean sweep. Tell your folks everything.
I only played a small part. I'm not the only one.
You stand alone today, Smarriage. Your 50 has shrunk some, hasn't it?
I think it's time we saw Stanley Gilkey.
Mr. Gilkey, please introduce yourself.
My name is Stanley Gilkey. I live in West Morley, room 101. I grew up in New Hampshire and I'm 19 years old. Last spring, I conducted the Harvard University Band, and I've done charity work through Phillips Brooks' house at the Prospect Union.
Thank you, Mr. Gilkey. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your Harvard life. For example, did you know Cyril Wilcox?
Yes, I did.
Did you know that he's dead?
No, I didn't.
He's dead. Are you surprised?
He was a little queer, or at least that's what I heard.
Did you know he had a male lover?
Yes.
Do you know Ernest Roberts?
I met him in the dining hall, and I borrowed his tuxedo coat on occasion. We have the same physique.
Have you been to parties in
No.
his... You've never been to...
No, I don't go out, except to dinner and the theater.
Where do you dine?
I've eaten one meal at the Green Shutters.
Just one meal?
I didn't like it there. Both the men who ate there are homosexual inverts.
How could you tell?
I took a psychology course this semester, which got me interested in homosexuality. as part of my broader interest in criminology.
Is Ernest Roberts a homosexual?
You'll have to ask him, but from where I stand, Roberts is monkeying with fire. I believe Roberts and his associates are queer. The only such group on campus. Cyril is in it. I'm not, I never have been. In fact, the whole group strikes me as hopeless and repulsive.
Have you told anyone your opinions before now?
My roommates and I talk it over in private as a scientific matter. In fact, I was more or less scientific in talking it over with Roberts.
Mr. Gilkey, speaking about this disease only spreads it.
I'm sure I have never communicated vocally to those who did not already know.
Have you been approached by a man?
Once, when I was 15.
Have you ever approached a
No,
man?
I have never approached a man.
How did you meet Roberts?
At the Waldorf, after an evening show. I was glad to make his acquaintance because later, one Friday, I needed to borrow a French book. I went to his room and he lent it to me. He told me a man from town was going to be visiting. Soon, several people came in.
What happened?
Nothing out of the ordinary. The conversation was normal. I spoke with Roberts and Ken Day, who was in B company with me. Another fellow from Perkins Hall was there, Edward Say. Now I must admit, though, I am dubious about Say. I wouldn't take him home or be seen on the street with him.
How long did you remain there?
About a half an hour. At this point, I was curious, and I wanted to wait until Roberts' roommate returned. I wanted to size the fellow up. I'd heard Roberts was an invert last spring, and I wanted to see if it was true. Roberts played some records, and I played cards. But sadly, nothing queer was said or done. Gentlemen, I have come to the conclusion that homosexuality is more serious than sexual intercourse. In fact, I think it's dangerous and ought to be investigated. While I have no wide acquaintance in curious forms of literature, I have read Havelock Ellis, including his book, Sexual Inversion. Not because I subscribe to this behavior, far from it. I know a couple of Freud's theories, although not very well. Nor have I brought homosexual knowledge to those who are innocent. This is, of course, all in keeping with Harvard's pursuit of the truth. And next, I suppose you're wondering if I masturbate.
Mr. Gilkey.
Yes, I do. But I don't think it's nearly as dangerous as homosexuality.
Mr. Gilkey, this is very disturbing, but I feel through reading and conversation that you have found out too much about homosexualism. You associate with men who have been found guilty of committing homosexual acts, and you have been most indiscreet in saying exactly who a homosexual is.
Again, no action or speech on my part could lead anyone to this vice. I have permitted no occasion to occur when I could have been misunderstood. I don't think there's any harm in private discussion. In fact, I think it may do some good.
But Mr. Gilkey, your curiosity has gone to an extent where you've stumbled into places where this type of practice flourishes.
A Harvard man should know everything he can. I want to know all I can. I've told Roberts time and time again that the whole thing repulses me. But it must be known.
And if you came upon two men having intimate relations, would you take notes? No, you're a Harvard man. You would knock their block off. Isn't that right?
I don't see why anyone should knock a fairy's block off. Nor is it my duty to tip off Washington and Wall Street. Let me repeat. It is solely an academic interest of mine. I did not go to Roberts' room except to borrow his clothing. If I'm guilty of anything, it's that I did not always ask his permission each time I borrowed his coat. If you don't believe me, please consider interviewing my fellows from Matthews and Westmorley Hall. They will testify to my clean conduct at all times.
Have you finished advising us, Mr. Gilkey? If it pleases you, I will go along that you are innocent of committing homosexual acts. However, you are too closely connected with those who are guilty for us to allow you to remain here another year, naively spreading this vice through conversation. It's my deep regret to inform you that you will receive a letter from the acting dean of Harvard College advising you to withdraw.
But for
No, Mr. Gilkey, we will have no more of your curious chatter. Knowledge in this matter is consistent with involvement. You will be dismissed from the college with the possibility of reapplying, perhaps in a year. Goodbye, Mr. Gilkey.
Havelock Ellis once said that every man of genius sees the world at a different angle from his fellows.
Finish the quote, Mr. Gilkey. Don't leave your thesis incomplete.
And therein lies his tragedy.
Next, we call Eugene Cummings. Please state your name.
Eugene Raphael Cummings.
You're enrolled in the dental school.
I want to be a dentist.
Where do you live?
165 Mount Auburn Street.
Mr. Cummings, why do you have a suitcase with you?
Aren't you sending me down?
Not yet, Mr. Cummings. We need to ask you a few questions. Did you know Cyril Wilcox?
Only a short time, possibly 3 months.
What do you know about his death?
He killed himself.
Are you surprised?
It's no mystery Cyril hated. Had a certain degree of self-loathing. He wanted to improve himself, but could not.
Did you suspect he was ill?
Cyril lips on about being ill, but I never believed him.
I gather you and he were friends.
I don't know many chaps. Cyril became my confidant. I told him about my life, and he shared things about his.
Did he share things about the parties he attended in Perkins Hall?
He told me a good deal about his parties. Cyril liked to dance and meet new fellows, be social, but I don't know the group he played with.
Does the name Roberts come to mind?
I know Robert's the same name as Cyril, but I know him very little.
Do you know Kenneth Day, Edward Say, or the town boy Ned Courtney?
I met Courtney in Robert's room.
You seem to know many chaps, Mr. Cummings. What about the college tutor Harold Saxton? Saxton once referred to Wilcox as Salome's child.
That's a silly name.
These men, do you think they're connected with his suicide?
They wouldn't harm Cyril.
I mean, did they participate in his downfall?
Sir?
Did Kenneth Day or Edward Say ask you to visit their rooms in Perkins Hall?
I never visited anyone but Cyril.
The proctor in Perkins Hall said he saw you in the company of these men. And Kenneth Day has already testified to your immoral behavior with other boys.
Kenneth is a bully, like the rest of them. They don't know me personally.
It's hard being a sensitive boy in college, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Always alone, having to correct your step and get in line with conventional behavior. Was Wilcox your only queer companion? And why did you attend parties in Perkins Hall if you were so shy?
Because Cyril was there. I knew I would be safe with Cyril. There was only conversation, but my suspicions were aroused by what was said. I didn't know I was being dragged into something.
You were being dragged in? But Mr. Cummings, your peers indicate that it was you who tricked Mr. Wilcox into revealing intimate details about his life. And it was you who became so active in this crowd as to have homosexual relations with its ringleader, Ernest Roberts. Whom are we to believe? The jury or the witness? What about Salome's child? Did you practice sodomy with him? You were Wilcox's confidant. You knew about his male lover. You went to these parties so you could find him and later seduce him.
I never slept with Cyril or any man.
Did you touch him?
What?
Did you kiss him?
No.
Did you corrupt him? Tell us, was it you who ruined him?
He was my friend. My only friend at Harvard. We had lunch together and talked and read the same books. No, I didn't ruin him. He was generous and light-hearted and made everything fun. I can't make friends like everyone else. That's why I tricked him into talking to me so we could be friends. And it worked. It worked. He was my friend. Why can't we be friends? Why are you controlling her? Why does everyone bully me?
We would ask these questions of the boy who instigated these hearings, Mr. Cummings. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us. But as Daniel Webster told us, there is no refuge from confession save in suicide. And suicide in confession. Have you ever been hunting, Mr. Cummings?
Huh?
Have you ever shot a deer or an elk?
I don't own a gun.
Maybe you should. Nature is a cruel thing, Mr. Cummings. In their natural habitat, animals can sense when there is a predator about. They can smell him in the air. Do you know what they do?
No.
Should they be suspicious of his appearance or awestruck by his eccentricities, they never fail but to enact one solution. They shun him. They take side against him. Clearly he is not one of us. Look how he behaves. True to their animal condition, they expel him into the evil of his own predicament, causing him to suffer every extravagance until the truth removes him from their sight. It is a practical act, Mr. Cummings, provoked not by hate or bullying, but by surprise at one who has nurtured base, even heathen vulgarities. Therefore, like zookeepers who must avoid the incurable specimen, we must remove you from our sight and send you down, Mr. Cummings.
But I'm not an animal.
Please refrain from excitement. It may alarm those innocents on this campus. Clearly, you are not in control of your emotions. I suggest you check into the infirmary. You are falling apart. Let's end this. Bring me Roberts.
Mr. Roberts,
Ernest Weeks Roberts.
where do you live?
Perkins Hall, room 28.
How do you like it there?
It's picturesque.
Do you consider your room typical of that of a Harvard man?
It's not heroic, if that's what you mean. But it does have style, which most men can't afford.
Do you keep alcohol in your room?
Not any more than my father keeps in Congress. Gentlemen, why am I here?
On May 14th last month, Cyril Wilcox committed suicide. Why do you suppose?
A man does not commit suicide if he's having a good day. Wilcox was weak, despondent, and often talked of suicide. The underclasses always commit suicide when times are rough. Cyril's father claims he was never despondent, but what do fathers know, anyway? The old coot still doesn't get whether Cyril's death was natural or unnatural. Silly Cyril. Salome's child. I'll remember you now. Cyril practically lived with a man in Boston, Harold Dreyfus. I met Harry a year ago this spring. Got to know him after college closed. Attractive chap for an older man, though he didn't appeal to me. They met at the lighted lamp. Dreyfus went in and Cyril came out. Cyril went home with Dreyfus almost every night. But then Cyril decided to give Dreyfus up and asked me to write a letter. Dreyfus wrote back, threatening to expose him to the college authorities. Some men are a bit rash in their correspondence, clearly a less educated man.
Mr. Roberts, you wrote a letter to Wilcox at the time of his death, but its contents do not corroborate your education. To read from your pen. Bradley is the sweetest, most lovable thing, and so funny. Always saying cute things in such a naive way. I haven't made Bradley yet, but my dear, wait. When I do, it will last for 2 days and 2 nights without taking it out. Can you explain this boy and your intentions towards him?
I spend a good deal of time in Brookline, where I have a girl, Helen. I can say anything to Helen, and often do, jokingly. Bradley is her kid brother. A boy of 20, with a big heart.
Your letter reveals an ambition to ruin him.
Not the whole letter, just that line. As I said, I can tell them anything and make them laugh. Bradley is a pushover, as was Cyril.
Your whole letter continues. They have the same drag parties in my room, and I really am relieved. Between you and me, I think I've had my day. That's as far as getting next to every queer that comes along, and these terrible faggot parties bore not to say disgust me.
I wrote incorrectly. It was not a party, but a play. We were rehearsing a fraternity play in my room. I was the leading woman, though poorly cast, I must admit. It was only dramatics, tiresome as they become.
And was it dramatics when you continued, I didn't get dressed all day yesterday, but lounged around in silk pajamas and a silk bathrobe. Friends of this old faggot I told you about came out in the afternoon, and we played around for hours. Mr. Roberts, are you a homosexual?
To a certain extent, I'm familiar with those experiences. I was taught by a schoolboy 8 or 10 years ago. I suppose it's abnormal breaking with tradition and having relations with men. I'm not such a blue nose, which might concern some. But the truth is, there's no need to be careful with a man like you do with a girl. You gentlemen should know this, having already come through the Harvard ranks. But like I wrote, they've all become bores. I've had no diversions for, 3 months now.
An anonymous student describes your party by writing, "Where the most disgusting and disgraceful and revolting acts of degeneracy and depravity took place openly in plain view of all present." How do you explain these words?
They're a little corrosive.
Mr. Roberts, please identify the following men as guilty or innocent of the charge of homosexuality. Edward Say.
There has been talk that he is that sort.
Kenneth Day.
Partly guilty. Cyril dragged him into it, but not of his own free will.
Courtney and Husey.
I would say guilty, but they're safe in Boston now, aren't they?
Joseph Lombard.
Innocent as a brick.
Eugene Cummings and Harold Saxton.
Guilty. With me.
Mr. Roberts, why did you come to Harvard?
To attend the medical school. I was encouraged to apply by my prep school teachers. They said Harvard deans were sweet to their boys, easy to get along with, and especially good in the classroom. I was told they would personally make you into a Harvard man.
Christ, Roberts, shut up!
Young man, it seems you have been operating under a misconception of what a Harvard man is. Let me assure you, you are not he. Your name is mentioned in every document relating to the death of Sir Wilcox as being the chief architect of homosexual practices on this campus. Your clever tongue has not been sharp enough to prevent you from confessing to obscene relations with Cummings, Saxton, several Boston men, and I suspect Mr. Wilcox.
That is correct. Like Kenneth, Cyril led me astray.
Mr. Wilcox led you astray? I find that impossible to believe. Mr. Roberts, you are the worst student I have ever come across. Your indiscretion is abominable. You have a contempt for this university that I find unforgivable, and you have sought to undermine our institution by inviting vulgar crowds into campus buildings, expanding your inner circle until a student is asphyxiated on your sexual ether. Everyone wears a mask in life, dear boy, but yours is ugly. You will be advised by the acting dean to withdraw from Harvard under the charge of immoral behavior.
What a clumsy charge. It's not enough for you to accuse me. You must prove it publicly. I can get a lawyer. My record is clean and beyond reproach. You just want to throw me out as you did Cyril. Make a mess of another family like you've done the Wilcoxes. But it won't work.
Take your medicine, Roberts, and get out!
Gentlemen, I have spent my summers on motor trips through New England, where I befriended handsome men and women, not decaying in some dusty library. I grew up the son of a Massachusetts state congressman with whom I befriended titans of industry, not mice of intellect. I agree that parading about silk pajamas might be alarming, but I will frolic at my leisure. And I will complete my education here.
Young man, you will leave at once.
I will expose these here.
You will be silent!
I will break you in two! Don't threaten me like you threatened Cyril. He told me how he was forced to withdraw in shame. Well, I will not fold. I will not leave. And I will not die!
Gentlemen, in the past few days, a catastrophe has been visited upon this university, so extraordinary in nature as to silently shatter the purest foundations of morality and discipline which this college has strove to preserve. We have heard testimony from a group of men concerning the presence of homosexuals on campus, whose influence threatened our very mission to be the lamp of learning in all ages, lit by discipline and truth, wisdom and justice, and not dampened by alcohol, recklessness, and sexual degeneracy. Thus, we have done no wrong to banish those few incurables, marching to higher ground, knowing full well that we have achieved victory for the incoming class. Those who started off as Harvard men have fallen by their own doings. Those guilty are those gone. This court is so adjourned.
It wasn't until last month that I knew anything was wrong with Cyril. That's why I wrote the letter. Something was
It
wrong.
was usually a fellow named Pat. He slept in my room 7 or 8 times. And once I slept with Bill Toomey.
And I thought I had overcome the habit. That's all it is, a habit.
If it helps, I know 50 men like him.
I've come to the conclusion that homosexuality is more serious than sexual intercourse. In fact, I think it's dangerous and ought to be investigated.
But I'm not queer.
This is unjust. I've done nothing wrong. I'm the least involved.
But I'm not an animal. I'm not an animal.
Please,